The Imperial starship materialized above Pyraxis Prime 2 months ahead of schedule. Emperor Zarathax stood at the observation deck, his massive draconic form casting shadows across the polished floor. 3 centuries he had ruled, and never had a war ended so swiftly. The entropy swarm had collapsed after one brilliant tactical strike, and now he could finally return home. He dismissed his honor guard at the palace entrance. After months of constant battle, he craved solitude. His private chambers in the Eastern Tower had always been his sanctuary, a place where he could shed the weight of empire and simply exist. The ancient meditation crystals would still be humming softly. His collection of war trophies from a dozen campaigns would stand exactly where he left them. Everything would be as it should be. But as he climbed the tower stairs in his smaller humanoid form, he heard something impossible. Music. Not the ceremonial draconic chants that echoed through palace halls, but something else. Something bright and chaotic and utterly foreign. He paused at the entrance to his chambers, scales bristling with confusion. Human voices. Multiple humans speaking rapidly in that quick, efficient language from Earth. And laughter. Someone was laughing in his private sanctuary. Zarathax pressed himself against the wall, using skills he had not employed in decades to mask his presence. Through the partially open door, he could see into his transformed chambers. His priceless voidstone sculpture had been moved to the corner. His meditation crystals, each one calibrated over centuries, were being used to hold down papers covered in human writing. Strange glowing devices covered every surface. And there, standing in the center of his room like she belonged there, was Narration, his maid. The nervous human woman who barely spoke above a whisper when serving his meals. Except she was not nervous now. She stood before a holographic display, pointing at complex diagrams while a dozen other humans listened intently. The psychological profile is almost complete, Lyra said, her voice steady and confident. The Emperor maintains strict routines to create an illusion of control. He has isolated himself for so long that genuine connection terrifies him more than any enemy. His advisors learned centuries ago to only tell him what he wants to hear. Zarathax felt heat rising in his chest. This human, this servant, was analyzing him like some laboratory specimen. Another human, an older male, spoke up. And you are certain this will work? If he discovers what we are doing before we finish. Then we die, Lyra interrupted calmly. But if we do nothing, his entire species dies. The Draconic Empire is not losing the war because they lack strength. They are losing because they have not changed in 1,000 years. They have become predictable. Rigid. And rigidity is death when facing an enemy that evolves. She pulled up another hologram showing battle formations and tactical analyses. I have been observing the Emperor for 8 months. I have studied every decision, every pattern. The dragons are brilliant, but they are trapped by their own traditions. They need what humanity has. They need chaos. Flexibility. They need to learn that survival matters more than pride. A younger human woman raised her hand. What if he refuses to listen? Lyra was quiet for a moment. Then I will have failed, and the greatest civilization in the galaxy will crumble because one dragon was too proud to accept help from a species he considers primitive. She turned back to the display. But I do not think he will refuse. Somewhere beneath 3 centuries of imperial dignity is a dragon who remembers what it means to truly live. We just have to reach him before it is too late. She tapped the hologram, bringing up a timeline. All right everyone, the Emperor will be back in 2 months. That gives us just enough time to finish the project. If we pull this off, we might actually save his entire species. Zarathax stood frozen in the hallway, torn between rage and something he had not felt in a very long time. Curiosity. This human had infiltrated his home, violated his privacy, and had the audacity to think she could save dragons. The terrifying part was that she might be right. Zarathax did not reveal himself. Instead, he retreated to a hidden alcove, a secret passage built into the palace walls centuries ago. From there, he could observe without being detected. His pride demanded he storm in and punish this insolence immediately. His curiosity whispered a different command: watch and learn. For 3 days he spied on the humans working in his chambers. What he discovered shocked him more than any battle ever had. Lyra Chin was not simply a maid. The other humans called her Dr. Chin, and they treated her with the respect reserved for military commanders. She directed their activities with precision, assigning tasks and reviewing reports. Each human had a specific role. One analyzed draconic military history. Another studied cultural patterns. A third reviewed economic data from across the empire. They were not thieves or saboteurs. They were researchers conducting the most comprehensive study of draconic civilization ever attempted by an outside species. And they had been doing it right under his nose for 8 months. On the 4th day of observation, Zarathax finally understood the scope of their project. Lyra gathered her team for a full briefing, and he listened from the shadows as she revealed everything. The entropy swarm is not the real problem, she said, displaying star maps showing the war's progression. The swarm is a symptom. Look at these patterns. Every time the draconic military develops a counter-strategy, it takes an average of 6 months to implement across all forces. Why? Because every decision must flow up through 12 levels of command, get approved by the Emperor, then flow back down. By the time orders reach the front lines, the tactical situation has completely changed. One of the humans, a man with gray hair, nodded grimly. Human militaries learned this lesson centuries ago. Rigid hierarchies fail against adaptive enemies. You need officers who can make decisions in the field. Exactly, Lyra continued. But suggesting this to draconic commanders is considered insulting. It implies the Emperor's judgment is not perfect. So they continue losing battles they should win, and nobody dares say why. She pulled up another display, this one showing economic charts. The Empire's production capacity is half what it should be. Workers are afraid to suggest improvements because it might imply their superiors made mistakes. Innovation has stopped. Everyone just follows the old methods even when those methods no longer work. A younger woman raised her hand. What about the palace staff? Your test program? Lyra smiled, and Zarathax saw genuine pride on her face. That is our proof of concept. I convinced the head steward to try some human management techniques. Small things at first. Allowing servants to suggest schedule changes. Creating teams that could solve problems without waiting for approval. Recognizing good work publicly. She displayed a graph showing dramatic improvements. In 6 months, palace efficiency increased by 340%. Staff satisfaction is the highest it has been in decades. Workers started volunteering solutions to problems that had existed for years. All because we gave them permission to think for themselves. The gray-haired man whistled softly. If we could do this across the entire empire, we could turn the tide of the war, Lyra finished. But there is a problem. The biggest problem. She pulled up an image and Zarathax felt his breath catch. It was a detailed psychological profile of him. Emperor Zarathax has ruled for 3 centuries, Lyra said quietly. In that time he has become increasingly isolated. He trusts no one completely. He maintains absolute control because chaos terrifies him. His advisors learned long ago to only bring him good news and safe suggestions. He is surrounded by people, but he is utterly alone. She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was gentle. He is also brilliant, honorable, and desperately wants to save his people. Somewhere inside he knows the empire is dying. But admitting that means admitting his rule has contributed to the problem. That may be beyond even his courage. Zarathax watched as Lyra opened a communication channel. Her next words made his blood run cold. Director Martinez, we have a problem. The psychological profile shows a critical flaw. When the Emperor discovers what we have done, there is a 73% chance he will execute us all before listening. We need to accelerate the timeline. In the shadows, the Dragon Emperor realized he was holding his breath. These humans had gambled everything on a 27% chance that he would listen instead of killing them. They had bet their lives that he was better than he feared he might be. Zarathax had heard enough. He stepped from the shadows, allowing his presence to fill the room. His eyes blazed with ancient fire, and his voice carried the weight of 3 centuries of absolute authority. You need not accelerate anything, he said coldly. I am already here. The humans froze. Several turned pale. One dropped the data pad he was holding. But Lyra simply turned to face him, her expression calm despite the fear he could smell on her. Your Majesty, she said, bowing her head slightly. You are early. Would you like to see what we have accomplished, or shall we proceed directly to our executions? The audacity of her words stunned him. She was offering him a choice as if she had any power in this situation. He should have been furious. Instead he found himself intrigued. You have 1 hour, he said. Convince me why I should not incinerate all of you where you stand. Lyra nodded and gestured to the holographic displays. Then I will not waste time with apologies. Everything we did because your empire is dying and nobody dares tell you the truth. For the next hour she presented the most brutal analysis Zarathax had ever witnessed. Chart after chart showed the empire's decline. Battle records proved that draconic forces were losing not because they lacked courage or strength, but because they could not adapt quickly enough. Economic data revealed massive inefficiencies that everyone knew about but nobody fixed. Cultural studies showed how fear of dishonoring superiors had created a civilization where truth could not flow upward. Your people are loyal, Lyra said. They would die for you without hesitation. But loyalty without honesty is worthless. Your advisors tell you what you want to hear because contradicting an emperor is considered shameful. So problems grow worse while everyone pretends everything is fine. She pulled up comparative data from human civilizations. Humanity is weak compared to dragons. We live short lives. We have no natural weapons. We should have gone extinct 1,000 times. But we survived because we learned one critical lesson. Failure is only fatal if you refuse to learn from it. The gray-haired human stepped forward. Human civilizations rise and fall within a single dragon's lifetime. We have made every mistake you are making now. We have watched empires crumble because they became too rigid to change. We know what comes next if you continue on this path. Zarathax felt anger rising in his chest. You presume to lecture me about leadership? I have ruled longer than your entire species has had spaceflight. Yes, Lyra said quietly. And that is exactly the problem. She pulled up the psychological profile again, and Zarathax forced himself to look at it. The analysis was devastatingly accurate. His isolation. His fear of appearing weak. His dependence on routines that created an illusion of control. The way he had slowly surrounded himself with advisors who never challenged him. You are lonely, Lyra said, and her voice held unexpected compassion. You have been lonely for so long that you have forgotten what genuine connection feels like. You sit on a throne surrounded by millions and you are completely alone. Something cracked inside Zarathax's carefully maintained composure. You dare. Yes, I dare, Lyra interrupted, and now he heard passion in her voice. Because someone has to. I took this Maid position specifically to observe you. To understand you. Because I saw an empire destroying itself, and I saw an emperor too isolated to see it happening. She stepped closer, fearless despite his power. Do you know what I learned in 8 months of serving you? You are brilliant. You are honorable. You genuinely care about your people. But you have built walls so high that nobody can reach you anymore. And those walls are killing everything you have spent centuries building. Before Zarathax could respond, alarms exploded throughout the palace. Emergency lights flashed red. A guard burst through the door, eyes wide with panic. Your Majesty. The entropy swarm has breached the planetary defenses. They are attacking the capital. This should be impossible. But it is happening, Lyra finished grimly. She turned to Zarathax, and in her eyes he saw no fear, only determination. Your Majesty, you have a choice. Use the traditional defensive strategies that the swarm has learned to predict, or trust us. Trust humans. We can help you win this battle, but only if you let go of your pride long enough to listen. The palace shook as the first enemy strikes hit the outer shields. Zarathax stood at a crossroads, facing the hardest decision of his 3-century reign. Trust in ancient draconic tradition, or gamble everything on the chaotic ideas of primitive humans. The palace shook again, harder this time. Through the windows, Zarathax could see swarm vessels descending through the atmosphere like a dark swarm of locusts. His military commanders would be implementing standard defensive protocols right now. The same protocols the enemy had seen 1,000 times before. He looked at Lyra, this human who had infiltrated his home and dissected his soul. Every instinct screamed at him to reject her help, to prove that dragons needed no one. But he had not survived 3 centuries by ignoring truth when it stared him in the face. What do you need? He asked. Relief flooded Lyra's face. She immediately began issuing orders to her team. Martinez, get me a direct line to military command. Stevens, pull up real-time battle data. Kim, I need your psychological warfare protocols ready in 3 minutes. She turned to Zarathax. I need you to do something that will shock your entire command structure. Grant my team temporary advisory status and order your commanders to actually listen to us. Not just pretend to listen. Really listen. Zarathax opened a communication channel. His military commanders appeared on holographic displays, their faces tight with stress. Your Majesty, we are implementing Defense Pattern 7. The enemy should be contained within. Belay that order, Zarathax said. The commanders froze in shock. I am granting advisory authority to a team of human specialists. You will consider their recommendations as if they came from me directly. The stunned silence was broken by Admiral Krithos. Your Majesty, with respect, humans have no experience with. They have experience with survival, Zarathax interrupted. Which is more than we can claim if we continue losing this war. Obey or I will find commanders who will. Lyra was already working, her fingers flying across holographic controls. The swarm is using pattern Alpha 7 to penetrate your shields. They have seen this defense before. Here is what we do instead. What followed was unlike any battle Zarathax had ever witnessed. Lyra's team fed constant updates to Draconic commanders, but their suggestions violated every rule of honorable combat. They recommended feinting retreat to draw enemies into traps. They suggested using civilian communication frequencies to create false signals. They proposed splitting forces in ways that seemed suicidal but exploited gaps in swarm attack patterns. Most shocking of all, they recommended allowing junior officers to make tactical decisions without waiting for Imperial approval. Your command structure is too slow, Lyra explained as battle raged around them. By the time information reaches you and orders go back, the situation has changed. Let your officers think for themselves. It went against everything Zarathax believed. But he gave the order. The results were immediate and startling. A young dragon commander named Vyrix, working with one of Lyra's team members, developed a completely new tactic. Instead of meeting the swarm's organized assault with organized defense, he scattered his forces seemingly at random, then coordinated strikes from unexpected angles using rapid human-style communication. The swarm, which had learned to predict draconic military precision, faltered against something it had never encountered: creative chaos. But as the battle continued, Lyra made a disturbing discovery. She pulled Zarathax aside, her face pale. They are learning. Look at these patterns. The swarm is not mindless. It has been studying your military doctrine, learning from every battle. Every time you follow traditional strategy, you become more predictable. Zarathax felt ice in his veins. How long have they been doing this? Years. Maybe decades. She showed him analysis after analysis. Every honored tradition, every time-tested strategy, you are teaching them how to kill you. The more rigidly you fight, the easier you are to destroy. The implication was horrifying. The Draconic Empire's greatest strength, their ancient military wisdom, had become their fatal weakness. The battle for the palace lasted 6 hours. When it finally ended, the swarm forces were in retreat, but the victory felt hollow. Zarathax walked through damaged corridors, seeing the cost of success everywhere he looked. He found Lyra in his chambers, quietly cleaning up debris. She had returned to her maid duties as if nothing had changed. The sight of her sweeping broken crystal made something twist in his chest. Why, he asked. Why risk everything for a species that is not your own? Lyra paused, leaning on her broom. Because I met a young dragon named Syrax who wanted to be a musician instead of a warrior. Your empire told her she could not. She had to be a soldier because that is what dragons do. She looked at him with sad eyes. Humanity has crushed enough dreams to recognize when others are making the same mistake. Civilizations that force everyone into the same mold eventually break. Before he could respond, another messenger arrived with news that made his heart sink. 3 more core worlds were under attack. But there was something else, something that changed everything. Human colonies on the frontier, fighting with their chaotic tactics, were defeating the swarm far more effectively than Imperial forces. The solution was clear and it terrified him. 3 days after the battle, Emperor Zarathax stood before the Grand Council and announced the most radical decree in Draconic history. The Empire would undergo complete reformation. Human organizational methods would be integrated at every level. Cultural exchange programs would begin immediately. And Lyra Chin, a human maid, would become Imperial cultural liaison with authority to implement changes across all Imperial systems. The council chamber erupted in outrage. Noble houses that had existed for millennia saw it as the ultimate dishonor. But Zarathax invoked ancient right, challenging any dissenter to single combat. None dared face the Dragon Emperor directly, though he knew they would resist in subtler ways. Word spread across the galaxy quickly. When humanity learned that the Draconic Empire sought their expertise, the response was overwhelming. Teachers, engineers, artists, and innovators arrived by the thousands. They brought their chaos and creativity, flooding into an empire that had not changed in centuries. The palace became ground zero for transformation. Dragons learned concepts like brainstorming sessions where every idea was valued equally. Humans learned draconic meditation techniques and honor codes. Young dragons and humans worked together, creating hybrid approaches that belonged to both species and neither. Zarathax himself changed most dramatically. With Lyra's guidance, he began holding open forums where anyone could speak directly to him. He admitted mistakes publicly, shocking citizens who had never heard an emperor confess error. The greatest change was simpler. He laughed. After centuries of stern imperial dignity, the galaxy witnessed their emperor experiencing genuine joy. The war continued, but differently now. Human draconic forces fought with unprecedented effectiveness. The swarm adapted, creating new forms to counter their tactics, but now the coalition adapted faster. It became an evolutionary arms race, and for the first time in decades, the Empire was not losing ground. Months passed in a blur of constant crisis and innovation. Zarathax and Lyra worked side by side, often through the night. He began to notice small things. How she tucked her hair behind her ear when concentrating. The way she argued with him fearlessly when she thought he was wrong. How she saw him not as an immortal emperor, but simply as Zarathax. One night, after 72 hours of continuous crisis management, Lyra finally collapsed from exhaustion. Zarathax caught her before she hit the floor, and realized he had not held someone gently in over a century. He carried her to a couch, and when she murmured in her sleep, something in his ancient heart shifted. He had been alone so long he had forgotten this feeling existed. A year after the palace battle, the coalition achieved final victory. The winning strategy was so beautifully chaotic, so perfectly improvised, that the swarm's pattern recognition simply collapsed. The enemy that had nearly destroyed galactic civilization was defeated not by superior force, but by creative unpredictability. The war's end revealed a transformed galaxy. The Draconic Empire had evolved into the Draconic Commonwealth, a federation of equal species. Humanity, once dismissed as primitive, was now sought after by civilizations across the stars. Other species wanted their own human advisors to teach them the art of productive chaos. With reforms established and victory achieved, Lyra prepared to return to Earth. She had accomplished everything she set out to do and more. But on her last night in the palace, Zarathax found her on the balcony overlooking the restored capital. Below them, dragons and humans worked together, rebuilding with techniques that blended both cultures. In the plaza, young Syrax performed a musical piece combining human instruments with draconic harmonic magic. The sound was strange and beautiful. "Stay," Zarathax said quietly. "Not as imperial cultural liaison. Just as yourself. As the person who saw through 3 centuries of imperial armor to the lonely dragon underneath." Lyra looked at him, this ancient emperor who had learned to change. "That dragon would have executed me within 5 minutes of discovering what I did." "Yes," he agreed. "And would have doomed his species in the process." "I calculated a 73% chance you would kill us before listening," she admitted. "I gambled everything on the remaining 27%. I gambled that you were wise enough and lonely enough to take the greatest risk an emperor can face, admitting you needed help." "That was extraordinarily foolish," he said. "Very human of me." Zarathax looked at this remarkable woman who had infiltrated his palace, revolutionized his empire, and somehow reached a heart he thought had turned to stone. "I am beginning to appreciate human foolishness." Below them, human and draconic voices joined in song, creating harmony from species never meant to blend. Lyra took his hand, her small human fingers intertwining with his scaled ones. "So," she said softly, "what does the Dragon Emperor do now that the war is over?" He smiled, an expression that still felt new on his ancient face. "He learns to live again. With help from a very stubborn human." In the distance, the twin moons rose over a city being rebuilt, not according to ancient tradition or human chaos alone, but something new. Something better. And for the first time in 3 centuries, Emperor Zarathax felt not the weight of his crown, but the warmth of genuine connection. He was no longer alone.